Welcome to the Music Ed Matters podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Emily Williams Birch, and this podcast, it exists for you. Whether you're a music lover, an educator, a choir member, each week we bring guests to the show to help explore what matters in music. I'm so glad that you're here. Welcome to the show. Hello, and welcome to episode 89 on the Music Ed Matters podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Emily Williams Birch, and this is one of the very fun and special advocacy and collaboration episodes. In case you didn't know, these episodes are because I am currently serving as chair of the ACDA, American Choral Directors Association, National Standing Committee for Advocacy and Collaboration. There is a team of committee members, and we are working on empowering and equipping our members with tools to be the best advocates and to have the most meaningful collaborations. One of the ways we are doing this during my tenure as chair is by having really specific guests who come on the podcast to share their expertise, whether that's in advocacy, collaboration, or both. So in today's advocacy and collaboration episode, you are going to meet 40-year-plus veteran advocate and music educator, Dr. John Benham. He actually wrote the original book on music advocacy. He's been working in school systems, advocating for programs for over 40 years. In this episode, you'll hear how many teachers' lives that's impacted, how many students' lives that's impacted, and you'll hear the power of empowering parents, of working with the numbers, and so much more. He talks a lot about how financial cuts actually expose philosophical problems and how that then creates this principle of reverse economics. Don't worry. He does a fabulous job of not just defining all of these, but providing you with meaningful stories and experiences from his plethora and his heart of advocacy. His plethora of experiences, I should say. We also talk about why parents are the power and what we as teachers can do with that knowledge. The power of empowering these parents and creating parent coalitions. Before you think that's scary, just hear what Dr. Benham has to say. Towards the end of the conversation, Dr. Benham provides you with 4 kinds of threats and the 4 stages of teachers that are going through cuts and how we can grow and experience and get through these different threats and those stages. And at the end, he offers the do's and don'ts for all teachers who are at any part of this advocacy. Y'all, you are going to need a piece of paper. If nothing else, you're definitely going to want to share this episode with your administrators, with your school board, with anyone in your parent coalition. This is going to be one of those episodes to save and share because it is really powerful and full of actionable items and really great stories. This episode is brought to you by our podcast sponsors, the Kinnison Choral Company and Kaleidoscope. We are so thankful that they make these conversations possible. As always, it would be really helpful to get more people listening, so feel free to like and review. It is like just taking a second and saying, this was a lot of fun and I'm really glad you're recording it, because it was a lot of fun to record this one. I think that you're going to enjoy it. Grab a piece of paper and get ready to learn from advocacy and music educator expert, Dr. John Benham. Today on the Music Ed Matters podcast, we have a special advocacy and collaboration episode with one of my new friends, Dr. John Benham. Hello, Dr. Benham.
Good morning.
I'm so excited to be talking to you today. How are you?
I'm doing great, and I'm looking forward to the whole conversation here.
I am too. You know, listeners, sometimes I get the opportunity to talk to the guest one-on-one before the episode. We have like a pre-episode conversation. And the day that Dr. Benham and I met, I feel like I was so inspired for that entire week based on our conversation.
Well, good. I always love talking about the work I do. I call it a hobby that got out of control. It's just something that fell in my lap, I guess you could say, and it kind of took off from there. And I'm still teaching almost full time, but I just keep this advocacy going on the side.
So a hobby that got out of control. Let's start from the very beginning. Tell
Okay.
the listeners, who is Dr. John Benham?
I'm a parent. I'm a musician. I'm a music teacher. I like to do a lot of different things. I've enjoyed teaching all my years. I've actually retired twice now, but I still seem to keep going for some reason or another. I love the advocacy work because of its history. It started with saving the program from my own kids, and the word of mouth just spread from there. The neighboring district heard about it. They wanted some help, so I helped them, and then somebody else heard about it, and then it spread, and then the industry heard about it. So they asked me to get involved more, and so I did. And at this point now, this is my 40th year doing music advocacy work. Started in
Wow.
1981 with my own district, and I've worked now in 44 states and 6 Canadian provinces, and working with parent groups and teachers, but primarily parent groups, just past the $80 million mark in programs saved from being cut,
Whoa,
which is over 1,000
$80
teaching
million.
positions for over a half a million kids. So it's been
Jeez.
quite rewarding and exciting. I do it for the kids.
I love that you have the numbers ready to share with the impact. That's such an important piece of advocacy, but we'll get to all the tips and tools. I want to ask what's your background in education? So how did you become a teacher in the first place?
I did my undergraduate work in music education. I did my degree really was instrumental music education, but I did all my performance in voice,
Okay.
which probably leads to why I'm a lifer with ACDA.
Good.
My old card was actually number 105, but I think they've changed the numbering system now.
Wow.
I think it was 1967 I joined, something like that.
Okay.
ACDA, and I followed the journals and everything. I just haven't been to many conventions because I only directed choirs in school for 2 years, and then I went with my instrumental music education. And now I don't do any of that. I do ethnomusicology. I got involved in that, but 25, 30 years ago.
That's
And
such
so
a
I've
new
been to
field
that
too. You
since.
got involved in the beginning of that one.
Yeah, I did. It was really interesting. And I founded a nonprofit called Music and World Cultures. And we're now working in over 25 countries now around the world,
So
basically building music programs.
you really, it all stems back to your heart for advocacy. Because I think ethnomusicology, I took one class on it and loved it. It's such a aspect of storytelling, which isn't that the same with advocacy? How did you know that you were
Well,
going to be an advocate?
I didn't. I just was. And we moved from California back to Minnesota in 1981. 2 weeks after we got there, a mill levy failed, $8 million shortfall. And of course, the first thing they did was decide to cut the music program. Well, I went crazy because I moved into this district and chose it because of its music program. And my kids didn't want to move from California. And when I told them what we were getting into, they said, "Oh, okay." Because in California, my son's orchestra program in the high school had 6 students. Here they had 65 string players. And so he felt a little better, but now they're going to cut the thing. And so I worked with the parent group right away. And I thought, well, okay, I'm going to rewrite Reimer's book and Hoffer's book and anything that ever been done. I'm going to do the best philosophical statement that had ever been done. And then I sat back and realized all 7 board members had kids in music, as did the superintendent.
Wow.
But the financial crisis exposed their educational philosophy. So as a result of the failed levy, they were going to have to cut 150 out of 700 teachers. Massive, massive cuts. And so I'm writing this report. I got 2 paragraphs done and I said, this is ridiculous. While it is indeed a philosophical issue, it's not the philosophical issue I've got to defeat, it's a budget issue I've got to defeat. So my report was due on a Monday morning or Monday afternoon. And it's Sunday night at midnight. And I'm sitting here saying to myself, the answer's on the tip of my tongue. I know it's there. I know it's there. But I just couldn't think of it. I knew I had to defeat the budget issue. I woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning, and it was like it was written on the wall. It's in the numbers. It's in the numbers. Well, I realized that the average music performance teacher had 210 students. The average classroom teacher had 125. So the music teachers were carrying excess load of 85 students, which was 3 classes. So their financial worth to the district was the equivalent of 1.6 classroom teachers. Stated further, if they cut the program in the elementary, they're going to lose 65% of their enrollment in the subsequent grades, which we've now learned after 40 years of research. Therefore, they would have to replace every music teacher with 1.6 classroom teachers, which means they're not going to save any money. They're going to end up losing $500,000 a year.
Wow.
So I presented that to the school board in a board meeting, and the board voted 7-0 to reverse our previous decision to cut it. And we haven't lost our music position in that program since 1981.
This is so what you started with was what we all approach life with. We love music, we're advocating for it, we're telling the story of the power of music. And it sounds to me like you came to the table first with that conversation, but then had the epiphany that it wasn't the philosophy, it was the numbers and the money.
Yeah, which of course was underlying the philosophy or exposed the philosophy, but it was still in the numbers. So I developed the financial case, which I now have come to call reverse economics. That is to say, even though you think you're saving money, you're not going to. Well, the way the financial system works in the public school district, well, let me tell you the story. I was in Georgia in a district trying to save the program. If you've seen the movie Drumline, it's the kids from that program that were the drummers. And I was in the middle of my presentation, and a guy yelled from the back of the auditorium, "Stop." I said, "Okay, what's the problem?" He said, "Are you telling me if they make this decision, they're going to lose 1.2 million a year?" I said, "You nailed it right on the nose." And he said, "I've always thought there was something fishy about the way educational funding was done in the educational system. It goes against every basic principle of accounting." So what happens is this, in the educational process, and I want to preface this by saying, I don't necessarily condemn this for this, because if you look at the millions of dollars of money, funds that are being handled in a school district, you just don't have enough people to handle that. Mm-hmm. So the whole system is established on what we call a basic principle of averages. So the average teacher makes X amount of money. We have X amount of money, therefore the average teacher makes this much. So if we cut X number of teachers, we save this much money. For example, let's say we had needed to cut $300,000 from our budget, and the average salary was $50,000, then we cut 6 teachers. On paper, we've now balanced the issue. The problem is you never cut the teachers that are making $50,000 because of the seniority rules. So you cut the 6 positions, you may have only saved $150,000. But you don't discover that until the next budget year and realize you're still 150 in the hole because it didn't come out the way you thought it did. But they never figure it out. So this is what we call a ratio point. So ratio point is the equivalent of 1 teacher position average salary, which is then based upon the average student load. Therefore, if you have a music teacher with 200 students and a classroom teacher with 150, they treat that as the same financial value, not calculating that if you lose that music position because you cut the feeder program or cut the position, you got to hire 1.2, 3, 4, or 5 people to replace him. And I've never lost a case in that way.
You set out the numbers so clearly. It's fascinating. But why does it have to come from you? Why is that not something that's coming from all the people within the board making these numerical decisions?
It's interesting. Well, you got to realize your board knows nothing about this. They basically function as a tool of the community to communicate with the district. The problem is they get into the district in their position, and the board and the administration gives them the information, and they accept it. I mean, why would they challenge it? And they don't understand the fallacy of the process either. So if you were in a business, for example, and you needed to cut some money, let's say you had 20 salespeople, and you know you've got to cut 10%. You got to cut 2 salespeople. Now, would you call those salespeople together and say, which 2 have you been here the least amount of time, and cut them? No, you look at your sales and say, which of you is bringing in the most money? Well, that's what essentially we're doing with the reverse economic concept when we go into a school district. Look, you're cutting the wrong thing. And if you lose that, you're going to increase your class sizes. So by keeping your music classes as large as possible and your music performance classes, you're keeping your other classes smaller. Plus, that FTE advantage, the FTE value we call it, the music teacher being excessive, is also paying for the elementary instrumental program. So you end up coming or going, you win the case. The only time we've ever lost a case in 40 years is when no parents showed up to support the program, which has its own statement, or 1 or more music teachers undermined the process. So I've said many times, my next book's going to be horror stories in music advocacy. It'll have a pen name on it.
Yeah, you better write that with a pen name.
Yeah,
Let's come, we'll come back
okay,
to
go ahead.
those. No,
Okay,
sorry. We'll come
that's
back to
fine.
the teacher thing because I think what the teachers can do to be positive influences is definitely a key takeaway from this conversation. But can we talk about this power of parents and how we as teachers can use the knowledge that comes with the power of parents?
Yeah, well, this again is another issue. We elect a school board assuming they're going to do what is right, assuming they have all the knowledge. Typically, in a first school board meeting of a year, they go through a glossary of terms so that the people understand all the acronyms that are going to fly by you, SFR, FTE, and those kind of things. So we elect a school board to represent us. What happens is the board gets into the situation and they only operate on the information they're given by the administration, and therefore they rubber stamp everything. Why wouldn't they if nobody else gives them information? Well, what I have found in my years of doing this work was you give them different information, they'll go with the information that's the best. And of course, the first thing we do in the budget crisis is undermine the budget process by showing the fallacy of that. And now out of that comes the data that says you can't afford to cut your music program. And my first superintendent is quoted in a magazine, actually, and in the first video we did with NAFME, is saying, when you come to understand the principle of reverse economics, you realize you never save any money by cutting your music program. The assistant superintendent said, and furthermore, there isn't any group more capable of raising rapid political furor than a well-organized music coalition. So what happens, the board gets there and they become the voice of the administration rather than the voice of the people. So the coalition reinstates the board's position as the voice of the people. And that's where your political power is. Music teachers don't have any political power. We think we do, but we don't. I was actually giving a presentation and I was talking about this, and a guy in the front row shouted right in the middle of my presentation at a music education conference, "That's a bunch of baloney." I said, "Really?" He said, "Yeah, I can get anything you want." I said, "Well, let's do a little role playing. I'll be your superintendent. You tell me what you want." He said, "I want a new tuba." And I said, "No." And he didn't know what to say. I said, "You 5 people next to him. You be his coalition. What do you want?" "Well, we need a new tuba." I said, "Well, why don't you come into my office? We'll talk about it, some of the issues, and see what we can do." Why? Because teachers don't fire administrators, and administrators don't fire parents. It's the other way around. So they know they have to where the power is, but the parents have to claim that power. So a coalition, which needs to represent band, choir, orchestra, and general music, all grades, all schools, as a unified body, has more political power than anybody in the district.
How do these parent coalitions get founded? Does it take one particular parent, or do you come in and help them organize? How does it all work? You're talking about parent coalitions.
Yes, yes. In every case that we always organize or reorganize the parent coalition, because that's where the power is. People say to me, "Did you save a program?" And no, I've never saved a program except my own district. I equip the parents with the information and the process whereby they save it. If I come in, I'm nothing. I'm an outsider. So this is something that we need to learn and understand. And one of the things I do in reorganizing is saying that you need to have at least one person identified as a music coalition rep at every school board meeting that holds them accountable for communication. Plus, they aren't intentionally hiding things from you. You just don't show up at the meetings, so you don't know what's going on. I would say in almost every case that I have done over these years in working with over 400 districts, the parents have discovered, and the teachers, less than 10 days before the meeting in which their program is going to be cut. Why? It's been going on for several months. They begin discussing budget in August, and you don't find out till March or January. That's your fault. You need to be there understanding.
And so go ahead.
Yeah, in response to your question is how do they start? Usually because of fundraising. Okay. And fundraising, to me, is death to a program in some ways, because the better off you are at raising money, the less money you're going to get out of your budget. So I don't have a problem with fundraising for extracurricular things, and I need now to define the difference between curricular, co-curricular, and extracurricular.
Yes, please.
Curricular were held during the school day. We're paid for as out of the regular curricular budget, like all other academic teachers are. We're core curriculum, ESSA standards. And so we're curricular. When we do something, let's say a Brahms symphony, we're not just playing the notes, we're learning about Brahms, I hope. We're learning about the Romantic era, I hope. We're learning about the culture in which it was set, I hope. And now we're going to perform that. When do we perform it? Outside the school day as our final exam at a public concert. Would that every class had to perform in a public? We'd find out that our average test scores really mean we accept and expect failure in all of our academic areas. We just couch it under average test scores. So on a performing stage, you can't do that with music because your group is going to equal the weakest link. Mm-hmm. So that's co-curricular, directly related to our curricularness, but outside the school day. Extracurricular is any event done by any music organization in school, which is essentially public relations or public service oriented. So if you're doing, for example, playing at a Kiwanis Club pancake breakfast on a Saturday morning, that's not your job. That's extra. So your fundraising can come with extra things. Now, maybe your group wants to go to Europe on an exchange program. That's extracurricular. I mean, it's certainly related to curricularness. And I hope that when you're going, you're not just taking parents, but you're taking the Spanish teacher, the European history teacher, et cetera, et cetera. So it becomes an educational event. That's not going to be a part of your budget. So that becomes an extra thing. But anything that relates directly to your curricularness, such as your concerts and performances, is curricular in nature and should be funded by the curriculum. You shouldn't have to raise money for that. So I was presenting at a national MENC conference when it was MENC, and a parent said, "I'm so glad to hear you say this." He said, "I'm so tired of having the teacher tell me to go out and raise another $10,000 and then get out of my hair so I can have your kid." He said, "We need to be involved in other things." And I find that parent groups love to get into the other things, you know. They're publishing a newsletter, they're doing the website, all these things that the teacher shouldn't be doing because they should be teaching.
So you're talking about empowering the parents through the
Exactly.
use of a parent coalition to not just be the ears and the voice at the board meetings, but to also help raise funding for the extracurricular things, because the
Sure.
boards and the schools should be funding the curricular things.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
All right, so we've talked about the power of parents. We've talked about using the principle of reverse economics and how financial crises expose philosophical problems. But let's talk some specifics. I know that you identify 4 kinds of threats and 4 stages in teacher cuts. Let's talk about the 4 kinds of threats: money, ed reform, hidden agendas, and hidden cuts. Tell us what we need to
Okay.
know.
Well, of course, you need to be aware of the budget. And especially with choral programs, you never find a choral program listed on a budget cut. There's what we call hidden cuts. These are cuts made in the budget that include music but don't specifically mention it. So to understand, you should also understand that some decisions are made by your central administration and other decisions are made by the site administration. So the number one thing where we find choir programs in threat is when the central administration makes a statement like, "We're going to increase class size." What that means is we're going to change the ratio point. So it used to be for a 50,000 average budget figure, the principal got $50,000 in their budget for every 25 students. But now we're going to make that 26. Now the principal only gets 50,000 for every 26 students. What does that really mean? We're increasing class sizes and cutting positions. The position cut is up to the complete authority and autonomy of the local site administrator. So if the administrator says, I'm going to cut the choral position, they don't have to say anything to anybody. They just put that down as a cut list, and suddenly the teacher gets a pink slip and they're gone. Now, with central administration decisions, we usually find out about music because the first thing they cut is elementary instrumental program. Well, that's a central administration budget issue because it's an itinerant position oftentimes. So they have to be in charge of that budget. So you need to understand what are the areas of the budget that you're in. So if they say, for example, we're going to make a 5% budget cut across the board because that's the only equitable thing to do, you may find that music has twice as many areas of the budget as any other curricular area, and therefore you can cut twice as much. So I've said many times, I have 3 degrees. You know, I have the bachelor's, the master's, and the doctorate, But I say I have a fourth degree in educational administration. It's not official, and I don't have a diploma. But 6 years on the school board gave me a whole different sense of how the system functions and dysfunctions. So that's the way hidden cuts come. Now, here's one example. I worked in a district. If I mentioned it, everybody would know it. The choir guy was National Teacher of the Year. And they mandated a 50% cut in the program across the board, band, choir, orchestra, and general music, because of a financial crisis. Well, I went and looked at the budget. There wasn't a financial crisis. The only real financial crisis, they didn't have enough money to rent the local hockey rink for the hockey team. But they used this sort of financial crisis as a way to cut 50% in the music program. And one reason was there's a teacher they'd want to get rid of for many, many years, and this gave them an excuse to do it. The problem is, to get to that teacher in the seniority list, they had to cut 50% of the music faculty. Now, tenure does not protect an incompetent teacher. It exposes an incompetent process of assessment. So it's
You
an
should say
administrative.
that again louder for the people in the back of the room.
I've said that before. Tenure does not protect an incompetent teacher. It exposes an incompetent process of assessment.
Love that.
So you have to assess either for professional growth or dismissal. It may take 2 to 3 years to dismiss an incompetent teacher, and let's be honest, they're there.
Mm-hmm.
And so it just takes a certain process. And one of the things you do is say, look, I notice, for example, you're losing 40% of your students between the freshman and sophomore year. Why is that? Now, you can't dismiss a teacher for that without eliminating all the issues that may be preventing those kids from continuing in choir. But then you narrow it down and say, okay, look, here's what we're going to do. We're going to give you some professional growth, some mentoring help to help you get over whatever these issues are, to see if we can't grow the program. In the meantime, your attrition is going to drop by 5% a year. So it's all there. And I'm not advocating for dismissing teachers. I am advocating competent instruction for children.
Yeah, you're advocating for cleaner, more transparent processes.
Right.
So would these examples that you gave, would those be considered hidden agendas, or are those still falling under hidden cuts?
That's my next sentence, yes. Yes, that's hidden agenda. And then you've got the budget now issue, you've got the hidden cuts, you've got the hidden agenda. The one you haven't hit is educational reform. And of course, you're talking block schedule. Shall we have middle schools or junior high schools? You're talking tax vouchers. You're talking school to work. You're talking magnet schools, charter schools. And I'm sure there are some that I just missed running that list off. Educational reform is interesting. Of course, now we have STEM.
Mm-hmm. Or STEAM.
It depends on the administration. Our school has a huge, the middle school in our district has a huge sign in the front of it. It doesn't say anything, it just says STEAM. It doesn't say where a STEAM goes, it says STEAM, because it's a reaction to that. So I'm going to make some drastic statements here, which I guess I'm famous for. Whenever somebody calls me and saying they're looking at this issue of educational reform, I say, do you have a new administrator? How did you know? Because there's never reform without a new administrator or a local administrator who's seeking an advancement in position. Why? Because they have to demonstrate their skill as an innovator and agent of change. And it's just consistent across the board. We're building resumes for the wrong people. And so you'll find almost always this reform that's being proposed has not been studied or established on a basis of, here is our goals for this, and here's the assessment process we're going to use. So instead of setting up a series of goals to determine whether that reform is successful, they just do it. And then they come back 3 or 4 years later and say, it doesn't seem to be working. And still don't figure it out. So you don't adopt any change. And all change means is change. And I've said many times, you can get elected as president just by using the word change, you know. And so you have to say, what is changing? Why is it changing? And how you're going to assess that.
And is that where the parents come into play, or is that where what do teachers need to do with that? How can we, once we hear ed reform's coming?
I have never lost a case defeating block schedule.
Okay.
In fact, in one district, they tried to circumvent the parents, and we were able to to demonstrate that, and the state brought a lawsuit against the district saying you will change this right now or the superintendent and the board are gone. Now, my role is not to get rid of administrations and school boards. My role is to make sure that you make decisions that are for kids. Okay?
I love that.
And
That's
so that overnight then defeated the block schedule. Now some people love block schedule, and I understand that. I have a very good friend, a band director. He said, I love block schedule. I said, why? He said, well, number one, I'm not teaching 5 periods a day anymore. I'm teaching only 3. Plus, I got a raise. I said, well, that's interesting. So when you were teaching 5 courses, which 2 of the 5 courses are no longer offered to kids? Because that's a 40% cut in curriculum, potentially. Well, then, what about the time issue? Have you considered the time? Oh, yeah, we've got 85 minutes a day now for rehearsal instead of 55. And you think that's good, right? Right. All right, let's look at the year. Typically, in a block schedule implementation, the student loses 2,750 minutes of class time per course. Because if you really want to have it equal, you have to not go from a 55-minute period, but to a 110-minute period. So if you calculate it over a whole year, you're losing 8 weeks of instructional time per course. So in Algebra 1, you're losing 8 weeks. Algebra 2, you're losing 8 weeks. And now you've lost a whole semester. So you find the district saying, well, in order to get to the same competences, we have to add Algebra 3. So now they've got another loss. And I've never had an administrator say that block schedule was a financial savings. It always costs more.
So with ed reforms, what would a teacher do? Would the first step be to go to the parent coalition? Or when you hear that an ed reform is coming, what's the first step?
Parents.
Okay. Parents.
Parents, if music teachers, we have a certain ego. You know, once we get on the podium, we are indestructible. You know, we have all this power. But once you step off the podium, you don't have any power. See, so what we do is say we have that parent coalition that's meeting all year long. It's a combined coalition of all areas of the department, and here's our monthly report. Okay, here comes the administrative liaison committee, and they're the ones who are always at the board meeting. What's new? Well, we understand that the district is considering doing this. What will the impact on the music program be? So the music teachers feed them the information, and they go with it. It's like I said, I've yet to see an administrator fire a parent. It just doesn't work that way.
So we have input in sharing why an education reform may or may not work for our musical situations, but it goes through the parent coalition to the board.
Sure. Well, one of the typical things that's happened is particularly in a budget cut, administrators say, well, what would you cut? That's not our job. Our job is to say you're not cutting music.
Oh, that's really good.
The rest of it is your job to figure out. We're just telling you, as the people who own and pay for this district, you're not cutting the music program.
So we know hidden cuts are the ones that aren't exactly labeled. We know hidden agendas are hidden agendas. We've talked about ed reform. How is money different than what we've already talked about with reverse economics?
Well, it's just another way in which the district demonstrates they don't understand the value of music education. So if you have a budget crisis, or if you want to get more budget, you have to demonstrate your FTE value. Now we're back to the FTE equaling the average. Well, the average teacher, again, has 125, and you've got 210. You've got a 1.6 FTE value. So we find also that when your average enrollment in band, choir, and orchestra at the secondary level reaches 200, there's a sort of a point of diminishing returns. And so we say at that point, look, we're at like 210, 220 average. Or maybe it's just the choral program that's the largest. And it used to be the choral programs are the largest. I don't sense that anymore. I sense the band programs tend to be the largest. So we get into this and we say, look, I've got a load of 250 kids. I can't handle that. That's 50 kids a period, which is a 2.0 FTE value. So I need some more help. So maybe your program's not in jeopardy, but you need some help. Show them the numbers. We have earned getting another position. Maybe that's an accompanist position. Maybe that's a split position between the middle school and high school. but we use the same process because the administration justifies everything they do by the numbers. And they're not going to learn your language. You might as well learn theirs. So I call it my whole process empowering parents. You kind of ran that phrase by before, but that's essentially what the process is. A citizen has more power, more say in a local school district than any other aspect of politics. And decision making in education is politics.
Mm. These are great, and it gives us such clear definitions of the four most common kinds of threats to music programs. Now, let's talk. These are interesting to me. You have 4 stages of teachers in these cuts. Tell us about these 4 stages these teachers go through when this all happens.
Um,
So the first one we talked about was denial.
oh, okay, thank you. Okay, yeah, there are 4 stages. I wasn't exactly sure what you were referring to there. 4 stages that the teachers go through, or positions that they hold. One is denial. Like the gentleman that interrupted my presentation and said, I want to do it. And I said, no, we think we have all this power. The fact of the matter is we don't, but we think we do. And they're all of a sudden, typical phrase, our superintendent really supports our program, our principal does. Well, there's not a crisis yet. And the crisis exposes the real philosophy. So all of a sudden you find your program was cut. Well, oh no, there's nothing I can do about this, which is stage 2. We think we're helpless. So stage 3 is what I call apathy. Oh, well, as typical phrase. Well, we did lose some things, but we still have, in essence, my job. These people are always on tenure. Okay? And you don't find younger teachers fighting this because they're not on tenure yet. And they're the first people cut on the list anyway. So that's what I call apathy, or more specifically, apathetic. And then you have those that are advocates. One of the reasons my book is titled Music Advocacy, Moving from Survival to Vision, because I would suggest to you that well over 90%, close to 100% of teachers, music teachers, are in a status quo mentality. When you're in status quo, that's survival. So you need to be looking ahead. So that 4th stage is advocacy. Do you care enough to put your kids first? Do you care enough to let the people with the power come and help you with that? Actually take over. Get in the background, do your job, teach well. And by the way, being a good teacher, having a successful program does not mean you're not in jeopardy for cuts. Witness the gentleman who was National Teacher of the Year, whose choral program is going to be cut in half. And so you have to advocate, but your advocacy work as a teacher is providing the parents with the right information. So you need to understand in the process you're doing that who is in charge, who has the most power, what information do you need? Do you understand the difference between those decisions that are made by your central administration and your site administration? Is that an adult-centered issue that's being discussed, or is it a student-centered one? Almost always they're adult issues. Budget is an adult issue. Education reform is an adult issue, usually. I mean, there certainly are some reasons to do that. And so you need to look at all those aspects. Get out of the way. Do your job. Let your parents take over all the other stuff. You know, you got all sorts of people with journalism degrees, for example, and home publishing. Let them do your newsletter. Let them do your website. It's amazing what parents will come up with. Plus, when you get them into the crisis mode, for example, budget, witness myself, it's the parents oftentimes that come up with decisions, not with the solutions, not the teachers, because they're thinking outside the box. So you have to have those people, and they're dealing with businesses and human relations all the time. They understand this financial thing. Give them the job to do. Not only that, once they're successful, it's pretty hard to ever get them in a position where they're not going to continue being successful.
That's well said. I like that you're giving us tools and resources to act, but to also be able to make the time and space to teach, which is what we all love first and foremost.
Sure.
Let's kind of wrap all this together. You've given us some good tips throughout, but what are some of the do's and don'ts for teachers through all of this?
Well, number one, stay unified. The biggest problem I've dealt with in my 40 years of doing this work is teachers who undermine the process. Very typical. Orchestra programs go first. Why? They have the least amount of kids. Here's another example. I had a district call me, and it'll demonstrate what I'm talking about. And they said, listen, they're talking about cutting our string program. Well, it happened to be in my own state. It was like an hour drive. I said, I'll come and just let me know. I'll be there. They never called me back, and they cut the program. Next year, they called me back, and they said they cut our program. I said, I heard that. They said, can you come help us get it back? I said, thanks a lot. You know, it's a lot more difficult to get it back than it is to save it. So I went and talked to them. I always do brainstorming sessions, so I had the parents there, and I said, okay, let it out. Give me every complaint you've got, because you have to get rid of all the venom that's inside before you can talk. So finally, one parent says, well, the band director told me he didn't want the orchestra program because they were getting all the best kids. And another parent said, yeah, he told me the same thing. Now what have I learned? Why don't we have an orchestra program? Well, the parents went to the superintendent and he said, bring him in. Let's do the study. Because I always suggest a study, a status report, which then can become an annual report if they'll continue it. And so I came in and I met with the teachers. Of course, there weren't any string people there. The band director, choir director was relatively silent. The band director said, what right do you have to be here and tell us what to do? And let me have it as a person they knew because I was in the same state. We don't want the string program. Why? Because they're getting all the best kids. So are you thinking about the kids here, or are you thinking about yourself? Well, they already had 2 hours a day of band rehearsal because they had marching band before school for an hour, and then band was first hours. They had 2 hours consistent. What they said was, well, the orchestra teachers had all the general music classes, and now we have them. So what used to be general music is now clarinet sectional, saxophone sectional, trumpet sectional, etc., etc. They had now had 3 hours of rehearsal a day with their group, but no string program. So naturally, I gave in my report, exposed that, and the superintendent went to work and started to restore that program. But that's just kind of typical. I hate to say it, but it is.
So unify as educators, support each
It's
other.
just a major, major, major issue.
And keep the students at the center of those decisions, even if...
Yeah. Our board process, school board process, on every budget page, which can be pretty extensive, on every page, it says at the bottom, what will be the impact on the student if this proposal is passed or failed? Always the impact on the student. There's so many are student-centered. We talk about what I'm a band director. This is my band program, my choir program, my orchestra. No, it isn't. You're the servant to the program. You're hired to serve. The program is the communities and the kids. It's their band and their orchestra and their choir. And while I'm at it, I'm surprised how many people there are teaching band, choir, and orchestra that don't realize they even have a general music program in the elementary.
Talk about that for a second.
Well, we find that, in fact, quite often I'll take attendance and I leave general music out just to see if they'll speak up. We find in our research that those districts that do not have a competent general music program in the elementary have about 55% less participation at the secondary level in band, choir, and orchestra. We find if you start instrumental music later than grade 5, you'll lose 65% of your enrollment compared to other districts of qualitative excellence. So qualitative excellence has certain quantitative issues in it as well. And we also discovered quite a few elementary schools don't have a choir. I don't understand why choral music isn't built right into the general music curriculum. I mean, isn't that partly what it's there for? So let's have those kids singing right away. I know we used to say we're going to discover the voice in age 5. Well, that's not the case. And I'm going to try to explain this delicately, but I was working with my youngest grandchild who was still in diapers, and there was a situation that took place, and I was singing. You stink. You stink. You had too much pizza. You stink. You stink. And the whole time I was dealing with the issue at hand, and I finished, and everything was cleaned up, and I hear this 14-month-old sitting over on the couch singing, 14 months, 15 months old. He's singing what I sang. No, had he discovered his voice yet? Yeah, he had. So the whole purpose of general music education is to get kids involved in music. I always tell my students in music education, your job is never to make kids like music. It's to keep from teaching them to hate it. So that doesn't mean we're just having fun. That means we're accomplishing something. The joy of accomplishment is far greater than just having fun. So that kind of is going around the horn there, but
No, I love it. These are great comments. I feel like we're learning so much as we listen to you talk, Dr. Benham. I know a million things we could talk about, but you've given us some really tangible and actionable items. I always let the guest share one thing that really matters. What is some type of thing you want the listener to really walk away from this episode with?
Well, we need to keep student focused in every decision we make. I think we need to get that coalition. We need to stay united in what we're doing. We need to develop an understanding of how the system functions and dysfunctions for the best of our kids. And we need to learn how to have the right information and how to use it. Develop an annual report. There are examples of that on my website, as well as a survey form and a whole system of accounting the FTE value and financial value of your program, tracing attrition, all those kind of things. All you have to do is enter the data, and the statistical summary template does all the analysis for you. So every year your administration should know the status of your program. There's even an outline there for an annual report that you can do. And the template includes subject matters for each area. What are the faculty issues? What are the curriculum issues? What are the student participation issues? What are the economic issues? What's your 5-year plan? And so it's get organized yourself, give your parents, empower your parents to do what they can do the best, and you stay and do the best job teaching you can. And the other thing is student evaluation. They need to know what they're learning each day. Maybe this is the most important one. So my 5th grade band, and I don't know that I'm proud to say this or not, but I was the first person in the history district to fail a kid in grade 5 band. Because in my elementary program, you didn't just get an A, B, C, D, or whatever. You had a list of competencies that were expected to have been completed in that particular grading period. And they were all initialed as to whether you did or not. Well, if a student doesn't show up or doesn't complete his work, he's not going to get an A. He's going to get what he did. And the parent came in to me and I showed him the grade book. He said, okay. And then from then on, the kid did pretty well. So everything has to be student-centered. Don't get rid of that I'm the great conductor thing. Everybody wants to be the conductor, the best, the largest program. Get it down to the kid. What is that kid learning and how do you know it?
I love this. This is so helpful, Dr. Benham. Thank you for sharing all of this and for giving us tools, resources, and actionable items. I'll make sure to link your website in the show notes.
No problem. Thank you.
Students at the center. Data that supports the decisions that are being made to impact the students in the most successful way possible. Using the power of parents and understanding the principle of reverse economics to make sure that we have the space to change these lives with the power of music. I hope that you've enjoyed this special advocacy and collaboration episode with our friend Dr. John Benham. It really was a joy to talk to him today. I can't wait to hear what you think about it. If you want to have more conversations, especially around advocacy, collaboration, rehearsal, whatever, go jump over to patreon.com/musicedmatters and join the community over there. We meet up once a month and have conversations and share stories, and it's a really impactful community. I'm really thankful that you listened all the way to here. So let me tell you, in case you don't know, you, my friend, you matter. We all know that music matters, especially advocating for music programs. And I'll see you next time on the Music Ed Matters podcast.